The rain never stopped on this moon. Cold drops fell from the sky like needles, soaking everything. At the edge of a broken city, under a metal roof full of holes, an alien mother stood barefoot on a wooden platform. Her thin arms held a small child close to her chest, trying to keep it warm. The baby did not cry anymore. It was too weak to make a sound. Crowds gathered, talking, laughing, shouting, old traders with scarred faces, greedy aliens with credit chips in their hands, and humans who had seen too much war. They had come to buy meat, tools, or maybe a slave, and today they saw her. "She's no good," someone muttered. "Too skinny." "Maybe for cleaning," another said, but not much else. The auctioneer, a big man with yellow eyes and metal teeth, banged a stick on the floor. "Next up, a rare offer. Female of the Zalari kind, young, and comes with a bonus her child," he shouted. "Both for one price. Feed her, train her, use her." He grinned wide, but no one laughed. The alien woman kept her head down, her eyes fixed on the puddle near her feet. She didn't care what they said. She had no pride left. She had one reason left to live, and that tiny reason was sleeping weakly. Against her chest, the auctioneer shouted again, "Start the bid at 20 credits. Anyone?" Silence. 10? More silence. 5 credits, come on. She's breathing, isn't she? A few chuckles came from the back, but still no one raised a hand. The mother tightened her arms around her child. The baby's skin was pale, lips dry, and tiny fingers cold. She had to sell herself. If not today, the child would die tomorrow. 2 credits. The auctioneer yelled, almost angry now. 1 credit, damn it. Anyone want this thing? A boy in the crowd threw a rotten fruit at her feet. She didn't flinch. She was already numb then. A deep voice cut through the noise. "I'll take her." Everything went silent. Heads turned. A human man stood at the edge of the crowd. Tall, in a brown coat, soaked from the rain. He looked calm, quiet, his eyes serious, not cruel, just tired. The auctioneer laughed. "You? What for? You like damaged goods?" The man didn't reply. He stepped forward and handed over 2 silver credits. The auctioneer snatched them and shoved a thin metal tag into the mother's hand. "Congratulations," he sneered. "She's all yours now," the alien mother didn't move. She was ready for pain, ready to be dragged away. But the human didn't touch her roughly. He took off his coat and placed it gently around her shoulders. Her body froze, confused. The coat was warm, soft, and smelled like smoke and earth. Then the human bent down, looked into her tired eyes, and asked softly, "Can you walk?" She nodded slowly, but her legs shook. Her strength was gone, without a word. The man picked her up, her and the baby both, and carried them off the platform. Gasps followed behind them. No one had seen anything like that before. Not here. Not in this place. The alien mother didn't speak. She just stared at his face, trying to understand. She had seen humans before, some cruel, some careless, but none like this. Why? She tried to whisper, but her voice cracked. He looked down and simply said, "No one should have to sell themselves to keep their child alive." Rain poured harder, but his steps were steady. Through muddy roads, past broken walls and blinking signs, he carried her like she mattered, and for the first time in many nights, the child in her arms stirred softly, warm again, safe again. Maybe, just maybe, this human didn't buy her out of hunger or cruelty. Maybe he bought her out of something else, something she had forgotten even existed, kindness. And as the light from the auction faded behind them, the alien mother held her child tighter, and silently, tears mixed with the rain on her face, because she didn't know what the future held. But tonight, she was not alone. The small room smelled like old wood and smoke. The walls were cracked, but they stood firm. There was a bed, not soft, but clean. A heater hung gently in the corner, warming the air. For the alien mother, it felt like stepping into another world. She sat on the floor, her back against the wall, holding her child close. The human placed a blanket over them, not saying much, He moved slowly, carefully. As if not to scare her, she watched him from the corner of her eye, confused by every action. No chains, no commands, no strange looks. He brought a bowl of soup, the smell strong and strange. She hesitated. Was it poisoned? Was this a trick? But the baby stirred, hungry, too weak to wait. So she dipped her fingers in the broth and brought it to the child's lips. For the first time in days, the baby made a small sound, almost a sigh. The human sat across the room, giving her space. He didn't watch her like she was an object. He stared at the rain outside, his face calm, tired. She didn't understand him. What kind of man buys a slave, then offers her food and warmth? Hours passed in silence. She didn't sleep, afraid it would all vanish if she closed her eyes. When the child finally fell into real sleep, the mother touched its cheek. Warm now, not cold like before, alive. Still alive, the man stood and pointed to the bed. You can use it, he said gently. She shook her head quickly, afraid to insult him, but he nodded once, then laid out a small blanket on the floor for himself, and without another word, he slept there the next morning. She woke to find a clean shirt folded beside her. It was far too big, clearly his, but soft and dry. She changed quickly while he waited outside the door. When she opened it, he handed her a cup of something warm. It's just tea, he said. Won't hurt you. She took it with shaking hands. It tasted strange, but not bad. She drank it all, and her stomach didn't burn for the first time in days. That evening, she tried to clean the small room. It was all she knew how to do. To show thanks, but her arms still ached, and her knees trembled. She dropped a pot while trying to reach the top shelf. It crashed loudly, and she flinched hard, covering her head. He rushed in, alarmed, but when he saw her fear, his face changed. He didn't yell, didn't hit. Instead, he slowly picked up the pieces, saying softly, "It's all right, just a pot." She looked at him, eyes wide, heart racing. This wasn't what she expected from a human. That night, she cried silently into the pillow, not from fear, but from something even harder, confusion. She didn't know how to understand kindness anymore. The next few days were quiet, simple. She and the baby stayed inside. The human brought food, clean clothes, even small toys made from wire and cloth. The baby smiled, then giggled, and the sound hit her like a wave. She hadn't heard that laugh in so long. One afternoon, she tried to speak his name. Her voice was hoarse from silence. He looked up and said, "You can call me Gray." She repeated it softly. "Gray," he smiled. Just a little, then nodded. The baby began to crawl again, tiny hands patting the floor. Gray built a small barrier from boxes so the child could play safely. Every time the baby smiled at him, something softened in his eyes, not pity, not duty, something deeper. One night, she placed a piece of old fruit in front of him. It was all she could offer. He looked at it, then at her. "You don't have to pay me," he said. "You're not here to serve." She lowered her eyes. "But I owe you." He shook his head. "You owe your child a future." Those words stayed with her. She repeated them to herself as she rocked the child to sleep. The human didn't speak often, but when he did, it mattered. She didn't know what kind of man he truly was, but each day her fear faded just a little, and for the first time in a very long time, she began to wonder, what if this wasn't just survival anymore? What if this was the beginning of something she never believed in again? Hope. Gray never asked questions. He didn't demand her name or her story. He gave her time, and in silence he built something rare: trust. The alien mother watched him each day. He repaired broken things around the small home. He fed the fire, carried water, mended wires, and every evening, he left a portion of food for her and her child before taking his own. He treated them like people, not property, and that confused her more than cruelty ever had. One cloudy evening, after the baby had fallen asleep, she sat near the fire. She stared at the flames, heart heavy, voice tight. Then quietly, almost like a whisper, she spoke. "My name is Sarai." Gray looked up, but said nothing. He only nodded once. A silent way of saying, "I'm listening." Sarai's voice shook as she continued. "I had a mate once. His name was Turan. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't stop. He died during the border raids, protecting our home." Her fingers clutched the edge of her thin blanket. Their weapons burned everything. Gray remained still, no judgment in his eyes. Sarai blinked fast, then looked at the sleeping child. "She was born 2 weeks after he died," she whispered. "I thought I could survive alone. I tried, but the debt collectors came. They took everything." She told him how she ran from planet to planet, selling scraps, begging for work, sleeping in ship docks, hiding from patrols. She shared how her daughter almost died from hunger more than once, and how, when no hope remained, she stepped onto the auction block, not for herself, but for the tiny life she held. Gray didn't interrupt. He let her speak all the broken pieces of her heart. Then, in the stillness of the room, he said only one thing: "You are brave." Sarai blinked at him, confused. "No," she said. "I was desperate." He shook his head slowly. "Desperation doesn't make you weak," he said. "It shows how far you'll go for someone you love." Those words sank deep into her soul. No one had ever called her brave before. Not even when she gave up her freedom that night. She slept deeper than she had in months. And for the first time, she didn't dream of running or hiding. The next morning, Sarai helped prepare food. She learned to use the human tools, how to cook the simple meals he liked. Gray watched her with quiet respect, never correcting, always patient. When the baby giggled and threw mashed food on the wall, Sarai looked up, scared, thinking Gray would be angry, but instead, he laughed softly and handed her a clean cloth. "No harm done," he said. Wiping his shirt, Sarai smiled. Just a little later, while fixing the fence outside, Gray told her about Earth, not the big cities, not the war, just stories of home. Of his sister who planted flowers, even when bombs fell. Of his father who shared food with strangers, even when hungry. Of a childhood spent under trees, not ships. Sarai listened closely. The way a dying flower turns toward light. These weren't just stories. They were proof that goodness could exist, that not all humans were cruel. One night, the baby cried from a nightmare. Gray came in quietly, knelt beside them. He didn't touch, just sang softly in a rough voice, a lullaby from Earth. The baby stopped crying, and Sarai stared at him. Something deep inside her stirred, something unfamiliar and frightening. Not fear, not debt, but comfort. Gray stood and said, "You're safe here." Sarai wanted to believe him. She really did. But safety was something she had never known. And love was something she thought had died with Turan. Still, each day with Gray, she felt something change, not all at once, but slowly, like snow melting under spring sun. The walls around her heart began to crack, and though she said nothing out loud, her eyes began to speak. And Gray listened, not with answers, but with patience. Life. In the hills of Outpost, 12 moved slowly. People worked hard, kept to themselves, and didn't like outsiders. So when Gray returned to the village with an alien woman and her child, the silence wasn't just awkward, it was heavy. Eyes followed them through the narrow streets. Sarai clutched her baby close, heart pounding. Children stopped playing, storekeepers stopped talking. Even the stray dogs seemed to pause. Sensing something different, Gray didn't speak to the villagers that day. He walked calmly, as if nothing was wrong. But Sarai could feel the coldness thick like smoke around her. Later, at the small supply post, the shopkeeper narrowed his eyes. "You sure you want to bring that around here, Gray?" Gray didn't flinch. "She has a name," he said, "and she's under my roof now." The man grunted. "That's your business. But don't bring her to the water well." The message was clear. She was not welcome. At night, Sarai sat on the porch, her baby asleep in her arms. The stars above were strange, far from her homeworld. She could hear voices from the nearby houses, whispers. "She sold herself, you know. Humans don't mix with them. Maybe he's just lonely." The words weren't meant to reach her, but they did, and each one cut deeper than the last. Gray brought her a cup of tea, but she didn't take it. "I shouldn't be here," she said, voice low. "I'm just making things worse for you." Gray sat beside her without speaking. After a moment, he said, "Let them talk." "But they hate me," she whispered. "They don't know you," he replied. "They just know fear." The next morning, someone threw something at their door, a rotten piece of fruit. No note, no words, just hate. Sarai found it before Gray did. She buried it quietly behind the shed, hoping he wouldn't notice, but he did. He stood on that same porch later that night, hands in pockets, staring out at the village. When a few neighbors passed by, he spoke. Loud enough for them to hear. "This house is open to anyone with a heart." His voice was calm but sharp like steel. "And anyone who doesn't like that can stay out forever." That message traveled fast. Some folks grumbled, others stayed quiet, but not all were against her. An old woman named Elsie came the next day. She didn't say much, just placed a small loaf of bread on their porch and walked away. No eye contact, no words, but it was the first sign of warmth from a stranger. Later, a young boy waved shyly at Sarai's baby from across the fence, then quickly ran away, giggling. Little moments, tiny cracks in the wall of hate. Sarai didn't trust it at first. She had seen false kindness before, but Gray seemed different. He never forced her to hide, never told her to stay quiet. One evening, while they walked through the edge of the village, a man spat near their feet. Sarai froze, expecting Gray to fight back, but instead, Gray stepped in front of her and said calmly, "You spit at her again. I'll make sure every buyer knows what kind of coward you are." The man blinked, surprised not by the threat, but by Gray's quiet strength. He turned and left without another word. After that day, fewer people stared. They didn't smile, but they didn't whisper as loudly, and a few even nodded at Gray as he passed. Back home, Sarai looked at him and asked, "Why do you fight for me?" Gray shrugged. "Because someone should have." That answer stayed with her. Because no one ever had, not since Turan died, and now someone did. Not with swords, not with loud speeches, but with simple acts of protection. And in the middle of all the cold stares and quiet hate, Sarai found something warmer than fire, respect, maybe even beginnings of love. The baby's laughter had become the rhythm of their little home. Tiny hands clapped, feet kicked, soft giggles filled the dusty air. For Sarai, every sound was proof. Her child was healing, alive, safe, slowly growing strong again. But peace never stayed long in her life, and one night everything changed. It started with a cough, soft and weak. Sarai didn't think much of it, but by morning, the child's skin was burning, hot to the touch. Her tiny eyes were half open, breath fast and shallow. Panic shot through Sarai like lightning. She wrapped the child in blankets, held her close, rocking back and forth. Tears ran down her cheeks. "Not now, please, not now," she whispered, over and over. Gray rushed in, saw the fear in Sarai's eyes. He knelt beside her, gently touched the baby's forehead. His expression changed, calm replaced by urgency. "She needs a medic now," he said. Sarah clung to the baby as Gray carried them outside. The cold air bit at her face, but she didn't feel it. All she could hear was her child's soft, labored breathing. They arrived at the colony's med center. Cold walls, bright lights, sterile air. A human nurse stepped forward, paused when she saw Sarai. "We don't usually take. She's my daughter," Gray said firmly, cutting her off. "Treat her like she's mine." His words echoed in the room. There was silence for a moment, then the nurse nodded. "Room 3. She said. They laid the child on a small bed. Machines hummed, lights blinked. Sarai stood frozen as medics worked quickly, inserting tubes, taking scans. Gray placed a hand on her back, steady and strong. "She's in the right place now," he said. But Sarai couldn't calm down. Her whole body shook. She had seen too many die, watched too many go into bright rooms and never return. And this child was all she had left. Hours passed, long and painful. Sarai didn't eat, didn't sit. She stood by the door like a ghost, eyes locked on the baby's form. Gray stayed too, always close, always quiet. Finally, a medic stepped out. Wiping her hands, "She's stable," she said. "The fever's broken." Sarai nearly collapsed. Gray caught her, held her gently, and for the first time she didn't pull away. Later that night, back at home, Sarai sat with the baby asleep. In her lap, Gray brought her warm water, but she didn't take it. Instead, she looked at him with wide, tired eyes. "You stayed," she said softly. "You didn't leave." He sat across from her and answered, "I never planned to." Sarai stared at him, unsure what to say. Her whole life, people had taken from her, but this man had only given time, food, shelter. Safety, now loyalty. She reached out without thinking. Her hand brushed his. It was a small touch, a brief moment, but Gray didn't move away. He let her hold it. Let her choose the closeness. "You said she's yours," Sarai whispered. Gray's voice was low, serious. "If you'll let me be." Tears filled her eyes again, not from fear, but something else, something warmer, softer, unfamiliar. She nodded slowly. "Maybe. We both need someone." That night, Sarai didn't sleep on the far side of the room. She curled beside her baby, with Gray resting nearby. No words, no promises, just silence. But in that silence, a bond was born, not of ownership, not of duty, but of care, of quiet love. The baby breathed peacefully in her sleep, and for the first time since the war took everything, Sarai believed that maybe she was no longer alone. The sky above Outpost 12 turned a deep orange that evening. It was the night of lights, a yearly festival where even cold hearts tried to feel warm. Colorful lanterns floated in the air. Music played from dusty speakers. And for one night, people smiled again. Gray had never gone to the festival since he arrived at the colony, but this time he asked Sarai to join him. She hesitated, her hand resting on her child's soft hair. "Are you sure I should be seen there?" she asked quietly. Gray smiled and said, "If they'll look, let them look." Sarai wore a long cloak, gray like the sky. It wasn't beautiful, but it was clean. Her baby rested on her chest, wrapped in soft cloth, her eyes wide with wonder. When they stepped into the crowd, all the lights seemed to stop flickering. Eyes turned. Some people paused mid-bite. Some whispered behind their hands, but no one dared say anything to Gray's face. He walked beside Sarai like a wall solid, calm, unshakable. Children laughed and ran with glowing ribbons. A few came close to the baby and waved. Sarai blinked in surprise. No insults, no stones, just curious smiles. One small girl even touched the baby's hand and whispered, "Pretty," before running off, giggling. Sarai didn't know how to feel. It had been so long since she stood among others without shame. Gray bought her a sweet fruit from a nearby stall. She took a small bite, and tears welled in her eyes, not from the taste, but from the feeling of being treated like she belonged. Then, without warning, the air changed. Smoke at first. People thought it was part of the festival, some kind of show. But then someone screamed. A large storage shed near the edge of the colony had caught fire. Flames roared, climbing the wooden walls. Smoke rose fast into the night sky, turning the stars gray. People ran in every direction, shouting, coughing, grabbing children. Sarai's baby began to cry. The sound of fire, fear, and chaos overwhelmed her. Then a voice yelled, "Someone's inside. There's a kid trapped." Gray didn't even stop to think. He turned and ran straight toward the fire. Sarai screamed after him, "No, don't." But he was already gone. Flames licked at the walls. Sparks flew like angry bees. Villagers shouted for him to come back. But Gray pushed through the smoke and into the building. Seconds passed, long and painful. Sarai stood frozen, unable to breathe. Then the wall exploded outward with fire, and from the smoke came Gray, his coat scorched, his arms wrapped around a coughing boy. The crowd gasped. He dropped to his knees, placing the child safely on the ground. The child's mother rushed forward, grabbing her son and crying with relief. She looked at Gray, eyes full of shame and wonder. I said you shouldn't be here, she whispered. Gray just nodded and said, "Doesn't matter now." People looked at Sarai differently after that. She was no longer just the alien woman with a baby. She was his, the one he risked his life. Beside, later that night, when the fire had died and the sky cleared, Sarai sat beside Gray, who had bandages on his arm and ash in his hair. "You could have died," she said softly. He looked at her with tired eyes and replied, "So could that boy." She reached for his hand, this time without hesitation. He held it tightly, their fingers locked together like they had always belonged, and under the glow of the last floating lantern, Sarai whispered, "I think I understand now." "Understand what?" Gray asked. "You didn't save me because I needed saving," she said. "You saved me because you cared." Gray didn't speak, but the way he looked at her, like she was the last calm thing in the universe, said enough. That night, while the baby slept between them, Sarai rested her head on Gray's shoulder for the first time. And for once, the world didn't feel dangerous. It felt like home. The fire was long gone, but its memory lingered in the village. Ash still drifted near the edge of the colony, but people now stopped to nod at Gray. Some even greeted Sarai awkwardly, but honestly. Children no longer hid from the alien mother. They waved at her baby, made silly faces, and sometimes offered berries in their small palms. Time moved gently, like a stream after a storm. Sarai began to walk through the colony without fear. She bought cloth from the market, traded stories with the baker. She even smiled when she passed the well, the very place she once wasn't allowed to go. Inside their small home, the baby had learned to walk. Her tiny steps wobbled like a drunk starfly, but she always ran toward Gray. Every time she fell, Gray picked her up with strong arms and whispered, "Try again, little one." One quiet morning, Sarai sat beside the fire, mending a torn sleeve. The baby sat in Gray's lap, chewing on a wooden spoon, and then, without warning, she spoke her first word, "Papa." Silence filled the room. Sarai froze. Her needle stopped midair. Gray blinked, stunned. He looked down at the child then. Up at Sarai, did she? Sarai nodded slowly, eyes full of something deep and fragile. She said, "Papa." Tears came to Gray's eyes, not the loud kind, just the silent ones that fall without warning. He kissed the baby's head and whispered, "You can call me that, if it feels right." Sarai stood, walking over slowly. She knelt beside them and placed her hand over his. "It does," she said, "for both of us." The room felt full of warmth, of breath, of meaning. No papers were signed, no words carved in stone, but something stronger than law was spoken that day. A family was formed. Word spread through the colony. Not everyone accepted it, but no one dared challenge it either. The man who ran into fire was now a father, not by blood, but by choice. An elder woman came to visit soon after. She brought a small metal charm, shaped like a tree. "It's tradition," she said. For new families. Sarai held the charm in her palm and smiled. She had never received a gift that didn't come with a price. Until now, that evening, they hung the charm above the doorway. The tree swayed gently with the wind, its branches open, reaching outward, like the future. Sarai stood beside Gray as the sun dipped below the hills. The baby played in the grass, chasing a moth with slow wings. Sarai took a breath, then spoke. "Back on my homeworld, we give new names when life begins again." Gray looked at her, curious. "And what would yours be now?" he asked. She smiled softly. "Mother." He reached for her hand, held it without fear. "And mine?" She didn't hesitate. "Home." And so under a sky filled with old stars, a new story began, not of survival, but of belonging, not of debt, but of love. The baby laughed again, and this time, even the wind seemed to carry her joy a little farther, because somewhere in the galaxy, one alien mother who had nothing had found everything.